Alright, for this video I wanted to cover the IRS Form 4137. This is typically included with a Form 1040 filing if you have compensation that was not subject to Social Security or Medicare taxes at source. Okay, so I've got one slide in front of us with the rules and an example, and then a sample Form 4137 that's going to be completed by our taxpayer here. So under U.S. tax rules, when a taxpayer generates income from tips, that is included in their taxable compensation, right? So bartenders, waiters, valet drivers, etc. They're all required to report this tip income and include it in their gross income. And you'll find those standards under IRC sections 1 and then 61A, right? So all U.S. tax residents report gross income from whatever source derived. That's the standard. So if an employee at a location receives tip income, nowadays, the employee is generally required to report those tips to the employer, and then the employer knows to add that into their taxable compensation, so it could be subject to Social Security and Medicare taxes, and it could be also subject to federal withholding taxes in certain circumstances. And then at the end of the year, the total wages and income are reported on a W-2, and you as a taxpayer get a W-2 to prepare your 1040. So here we're going to look at an example where there was some unreported tip income, and this is what John needs to include with his Form 1040 tax return. So we have John Smith here. He's a U.S. citizen, lives and works in Tampa, and he's a server at a local restaurant. We've got a fake company here, Frank's Fake Restaurant, and he's paid the Florida minimum wage rate for servers and bartenders, which is $8.56 an hour. Right. So John is also compensated from tips from customers. Okay. So during 2020, he worked 650 hours and was paid $55.64 in gross income. Right. So the 650 times the minimum wage. And then in addition to the wages, John received tips from customers totaling $4,700. But John only managed to report $3,000 in tips to the restaurant. So the $3,000 was included in his W-2 wages. But he effectively forgot to report the extra $1,700 in tips to the employer. So what does he have to do? Well, first, in effect, his W-2 is going to understate his income, right? So his W-2 income is going to be understated by $1,700, and the amount of income that's subject to Social Security and Medicare is also going to be underreported by $1,700. So John completes Form 4137 to report that tip income and then pay the Social Security and Medicare tax. Okay, so let's look at the form itself. So here, 4137, name of the file here. This would go along with your 1040. So name of the taxpayer, Social Security number, and then the name of the employer who is required to withhold these tips but didn't, right? So you could pull this information off your W-2, right? The name of the company, the EIN for the company, and then you include in box C and D the total cash tips that you did receive and then what was reported, right? And then so you just go down the rest of the columns and rows and complete the rest of the form, right? So we have 4,700 in total tips received, 3,000 was reported. So line 4 is the amount that must be included in income and subject to Social Security and Medicare tax, right? So line 6 is the amount of unreported tips subject to Medicare, right? And then line 8 lines 9, 10 here is when we compute the amount of tips that are subject to Social Security taxes. Okay, so remember, Medicare taxes 1.45%, that's the rate, and Social Security tax on the $1,700 is 6.2%. So that's where the computation is done here on lines 11 and 12. So multiply line 10 by 6.2%, right? So 0.062, multiply line 6 by 0.0145, that's the 145%. We have 105 and 25 are the underreported Social Security and Medicare tax. And then line 13 is the total. So this is the total piece of tax that John is liable for payroll taxes on the underreported tips. So this amount is going to be reported as additional tax on Schedule 2 of his Form 1040, and then ultimately it carries over to page 1 of the 1040 where it adds on to the amount of total tax liability he had for the year. Okay, so that covers it. So relatively straightforward form. Again, it's just important to report the tip income if you are obligated to do so. And in a lot of cases, taxpayers want to perhaps show all of their income or more income because there are other motivations, right? So if you're applying for a loan through a bank, they want to see how much money you're earning, and you're trying to disclose all your earnings, right, to make it look like you're more in a better financial position. So if you need to report the tip income that was unreported, Form 4137 is the form you use. Okay, so thank you for watching. I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.